Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I've done a lot of jerkbait videos over the years, and every time I do one, I get a lot of questions regarding how do I choose the right jerkbait for a situation. We go to the tackle shop now, and there are walls of jerkbaits, different sizes, different diving depths, different colors. It can be an extremely overwhelming selection because there truly are hundreds of different types of jerkbaits out there. Well, a jerkbait, as we all know, is one of the great cold water fishing techniques that we have. It's also become one of the best all year round jerkbaits. It really does a very good job at mimicking bait fish and generating strikes from fish that are lethargic, and therefore it's a great bait. So it's worth taking the time to understand what the right jerkbait is for a certain situation. Now, I've got a very simple method to selecting the right jerkbait. There are a lot of great brands out there. There are a lot of great jerkbaits that are made for specific situations. But really, what it comes down to is three things: your water temp, your water depth, and your water color. So, once you know what those three things are, you can make a much more educated decision. So, what we're going to talk about is the depth first. What's the water depth that you're fishing? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean are you fishing 10 feet down over 13 feet of water, meaning the bottom is at 13 feet. Really, what the water depth question is where are the fish located? Because once you know where the fish are located, what you want to find is a jerkbait that runs roughly 3 feet above their heads. So if you're fishing 10 foot of water, 10 foot of water, from the bottom to the surface, and the fish are relating to the bottom, you want to try to choose a jerkbait that gets down about 7 feet deep. Maybe you're seeing your bait fish are suspended in 10 foot of water over 100 feet of water depth. At that point, you probably want a bait that will still run roughly 7 feet deep, meaning the fish are going to be hanging out right where those bait fish are. And if the bait fish are at 10 feet, you want a jerk bait that's going to run roughly 7 feet deep. The same thing goes for the structure. If you're fishing structure that you know the fish are relating to, could be the top of standing timber, could be a giant boulder, could be brush piles. You want a jerk bait that's going to run a few feet above where you think the fish are at. So if you've got a giant boulder that's in 15 feet of water and that giant boulder comes up 5 feet off the bottom, you want to choose roughly a bait that gets down 8 feet because at that point it's going to be running right above that boulder. So a lot of times people want to choose strictly based on the water depth, but it's not just the water depth. It really comes down to keeping your jerk bait right above where the fish are at. And the fish could be holding on isolated targets, they could be holding just on the bottom, and they could be holding suspended around other bait fish. So my rule of thumb is 2 to 3 feet above where you think those fish are holding is the ideal running depth for a jerkbait. So if you've got a jerkbait that you know gets into that range that you're looking to get at, that would be one you'd consider. If one only gets to within 5 or 6 feet of where that target is, you may not want to choose that one first. So that's the first thing. Next is your watercolor. Watercolor is going to help you choose the color selection of your bait. A simple rule of thumb that I like to remember is if you're fishing what would be considered extremely clear water, which is 10 foot of water visibility or more, you almost always want to go with translucent baits. Baits that you can see through because at that point they don't stand out nearly as much, they blend in better, and the fish are going to have a great look at them anyways because your water clarity is roughly 10 foot or more of visibility. Now, if you're fishing watercolor that is less than 4 foot of visibility, at that point, that's when I go with a lot more of my opaque colors, meaning baits that I can't see directly through. It's a solid painted colored jerkbait. If I'm fishing anywhere in between that range, say that 3.5, 4 foot range up to 10 foot of water visibility, at that point, it's fair game. You can choose a bait that is opaque. You can choose a bait that's translucent. You're talking about a water clarity situation where it's still very clear, and therefore You can be translucent, but you don't have to be translucent either. The last step of the equation to choosing the right jerkbait then comes down to your water temperature. Water temperature to me is not nearly as obvious as some people would think. The idea being that a jerkbait's a great bait to choose in cold water temps, so therefore you just choose a jerkbait. But in reality, water temp helps me choose the specific jerkbait that I want because I have certain requirements that I think will help generate more strikes for you with specific jerk baits based on the water temperature. So what I'm referring to is if you have water temp that's 50 degrees or cooler, at that point I want a bait that will either suspend or slowly sink. 50-degree water is cold water, and at that point the fish are not going to be as willing to rise to your bait. You want a bait that will stay in their face longer, which is why you either want a straight suspending bait or slow sinking. As the water gets colder, I really prefer a slower sinking bait. It just seems like I want to get my bait down to those fish more so than any other time of the year. So if that's what I'm looking for, then you got to go with a jerk bait that's a slow sink jerk bait. It really helps narrow down which jerk bait to choose. Now, the other end of the spectrum is your warmer water periods. If I'm fishing water that's 60 degrees or more, at that point, I want a jerk bait that generally will have a slow float to a suspending position, meaning, anywhere from rising to being at that suspend level. The reason for that is the opposite. The fish are more willing to chase. A lot of times your fish are going to be in a little bit more shallow water. So therefore, even though your bait is moving away from them, they're still not going to be that far from the bait. If they're only in 8 foot of water during a nice spring warm day, as your bait slowly moves from being 6 foot down to 5 foot down, it's still in the strike zone for those fish. Now, if you fall within that range where you're 50 to 60 degrees, at that point, it really comes down to you and what bait you want to choose because, again, that situation could fall into either category. But those are the three criteria that I use when choosing a jerkbait. Don't let the hundreds of different jerkbait selections out there really get you confused. It shouldn't be that hard. You can probably uh, make good with 3 jerkbaits. You could buy one sinking, one floating, one suspending in a couple of different colors. And that can be all the jerk baits that you actually would need to be able to cover your lake efficiently and effectively. So I hope this helps. I get a ton of questions regarding, well, how do I just choose the right jerk bait? You tell me what color to use, but then I don't know what size to go with. And I guess that's the other aspect to it. Generally speaking, if I'm talking cold water, so that 50-degree period or less, that's when I'll go with your standard size jerkbait, which is roughly 4.5 inches or smaller. As the water temperature gets colder, a lot of times your smaller jerkbaits come into play. With that warmer water, 60 degrees or warmer, that's when I'm going to start throwing some of my bigger jerkbaits. So your 4.5 inch standard size up to your 5, 6, 7 inch jerkbaits. Just because those fish are more active, they're generally looking for bigger meals during the warmer water periods. And therefore, you can throw some of those big jerkbaits. But if you take some of those big 7-inch jerkbaits during the coldest periods of the year, you may not generate nearly as many strikes because of the fact you have a lot less fish that are willing to eat that big bait. So if you just look at your water clarity, water depth, and water temperature, those three things should really be able to allow you to narrow down your jerk baits to a handful of baits. That's really what it comes down to. It should be that simple. So hopefully it was helpful. If it was, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned. We'll have a new video for you tomorrow.